The marriage certificate lay crumpled on Hollis Vane's desk, the ink still wet, still smelling of something that shouldn't have been there. 3 witnesses had signed it. A preacher had spoken the vows. Yet neither Hollis nor the towering woman sitting across from him could explain how any of it had happened. Prudence Hollister stood nearly 7 feet tall. Her arms were thick with muscle, her chest broad like a blacksmith's, her scarred hands resting firmly on the table. Her back was straighter than a rifle barrel, and her piercing eyes carried secrets deep enough to silence any man who dared cross her path. She had arrived in town just 2 days earlier with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a story that changed every time someone asked. And now somehow, on the 3rd day, she was married. The rules of the town were simple. Courtship took months. A man sought a father's blessing, announced his intentions in church, and prepared a proper ceremony. Nobody got married by accident. Certainly not to a stranger. And absolutely not to a woman who looked as though she could lift a horse with her bare hands. Yet the certificate was real. The witnesses swore they had signed it. The preacher insisted he had performed the ceremony, though his trembling hands betrayed how little sense it made to him. What unsettled Hollis most wasn't the marriage itself, but the way Prudence had smiled when she saw the document. That smile wasn't surprise, it was satisfaction. As if she had been waiting for this moment all along, as if everything was unfolding according to a plan only she understood. The whispers started before Hollis could even leave his office. Through the window he saw Martha Clemens pointing toward him, whispering to 3 women at her side, their faces twisted in the same look of disgust usually reserved for spoiled meat or drunken brawls. For 15 years, Hollis had worked to build his reputation. He kept the books for half the businesses on Main Street, never missed a Sunday at church, and never once raised his voice in public. Yet in the space of a single morning, all of that respectability collapsed, crushed beneath the weight of a marriage he couldn't even remember agreeing to. Prudence rose from the chair, her head nearly brushing the ceiling beams. The floor groaned beneath her weight as she moved toward the window. Her shoulders were wider than most door frames, her hands broad and powerful, as if they could split walnuts with a flick of her fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of steady authority that demanded silence. "They're planning something," she murmured, eyes fixed on the women scattering outside. "Give them until noon." Hollis felt his stomach knot. "And planning what? To drive us out," she answered, turning from the glass. For the first time he noticed the thin scar etched from her ear down to her jaw. "Towns like this don't tolerate what they can't explain." The door crashed open without warning. Mayor Wickham staggered inside, his face red with exertion and fury. Behind him filed 3 of the most powerful men in town: Thomas Reed, the banker, Albert Shaw, the store owner, and Big Jim Morrison, the cattle baron. None of them looked pleased. "Vane," Wickham wheezed, blotting sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. "We need to discuss this situation." Hollis straightened his vest, summoning a confidence he didn't feel. "And what situation would that be, Mayor?" "Don't play the fool," Reed barked. "This marriage is a farce. Invalid. Whatever trick the 2 of you pulled, it won't stand." Shaw bobbed his head in agreement. The preacher was either drunk or forced. No man of God in his right mind would have gone through with such madness. Big Jim Morrison remained silent, his meaty hand resting on the grip of his revolver. His eyes, cold and sharp, never strayed from Prudence. Studying her like a predator sizing up prey it didn't quite understand. Prudence stepped forward, placing herself squarely between Hollis and the men. The gesture was quiet but deliberate, like a guard dog positioning itself for a fight. "The ceremony was legal," she said, her voice low but firm. 3 witnesses, proper documentation, the register signed in the church. Wickham's face flushed even darker. "Legal or not, this town will not abide such irregularities. We have standards to uphold." Prudence's lips curved into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Standards," she repeated slowly. Interesting choice of words. The way She spoke, it made every man in the room stiffen, as though she had reached into their private sins and held them up to the light. The silence stretched tight, like a rope ready to snap. Big Jim Morrison's fingers twitched toward his gun, but something in Prudence's stance stopped him cold. She hadn't moved an inch, yet her entire body radiated coiled strength, like a predator waiting for the wrong step. Mayor Wickham cleared his throat, desperate to wrestle the moment back under control. Mrs. What did you say your name was before this unfortunate incident? Hollister, Prudence answered without hesitation. Then her voice sharpened. And it wasn't unfortunate. It was necessary. The word cut through the room like the crack of a rifle. Hollis's pulse quickened. Necessary? What on earth could make their marriage necessary? Albert Shaw stepped forward, the gleam of profit flickering in his merchant's eyes. If money changed hands for this arrangement, perhaps we can discuss compensation. There may be an understanding that benefits us all. Prudence's laugh was low, dangerous, and without mirth. You think this is about money? Everything is about money, Reed snapped, pushing his spectacles higher on his nose. Name your price, woman. Whatever scheme this is, it ends today. Hollis watched as Prudence's jaw tightened, the scar along her face catching the lamplight. He recognized that look, though he couldn't remember where. It was the expression of someone who had been underestimated too many times and wasn't about to let it happen again. Gentlemen, Hollis finally said, forcing steadiness into his voice, perhaps Mrs. Hollister and I should resolve this matter privately. Big Jim Morrison spoke at last, his voice as rough as gravel. There's no privacy in this town, Vane. What touches one touches all. His chin jerked toward Prudence, especially when it involves strangers with questionable intentions. Prudence tilted her head slightly, studying Morrison with a predator's curiosity. Questionable intentions, she repeated slowly, savoring the words. That's rich, coming from you. Morrison's hand slid fully onto the grip of his revolver. You got something to say to me, woman? The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. Every man's breath seemed to hitch. Hollis shifted sideways, placing himself where he could watch them both. Prudence like a storm, barely contained. Morrison like a fuse itching for a spark. Whatever was about to happen, Hollis knew it would change everything. I know who you are. Jim Morrison, Prudence said, her voice quiet but sharp as a knife. I know about the cattle you've been running through the northern pass without paying railroad fees. I know about the warehouse fires that just happened to consume your competitors' stock. And I know about the family you drove off their land last spring. Morrison's face drained of color before flooding red with rage. You don't know nothing. I know enough. Prudence reached into her weathered satchel and pulled out a tightly bound bundle of papers. She held them like they weighed more than iron. The question is, do you want the rest of the town to know? Mayor Wickham blinked in confusion. Reed's spectacles slid down his nose as his hands twitched nervously. Shaw had already begun inching toward the door. But Morrison, his reaction told Hollis everything. His so-called wife wasn't just some wanderer passing through town. She was carrying secrets sharp enough to gut the most powerful man in the county. And somehow, their accidental marriage had placed Hollis dead center in a war he couldn't even begin to understand. Morrison's thick fingers trembled on the grip of his revolver, but he didn't draw. The weight of those papers and the deadly calm in Prudence's grip pressed heavier than chains. Hollis felt the shift in power like the sudden pressure before a storm breaks. You're bluffing, Morrison growled, but his voice betrayed him. Prudence calmly unfolded a sheet from the bundle. Bill of sale, dated March 15th. 200 head of cattle delivered to the Millerville depot. Signed by you. She raised her eyes, cold and merciless. Funny thing. The Hendricks family swears those cattle disappeared from their ranch that very same day. Reed's face had turned ashen. Shaw slipped halfway out the door. Even Wickham seemed to shrink, his certainty bleeding out of him. Morrison stepped forward, his massive bulk blocking the path between the desk and the door. Even if that were true, and it ain't, what's it got to do with your fake marriage? Nothing fake about it, Prudence said, sliding the papers back into her satchel. But everything to do with why I needed the law on my side. Hollis's mouth went dry. Protection? Protection from what? For the first time since this nightmare began, Prudence's expression softened, just barely. She turned to him, her voice lower, almost tender. From men who don't like. Inconvenient witnesses. The pieces slammed into place in Hollis's mind like tumblers in a lock, the mysterious arrival, the rushed marriage, the way she carried herself. Like someone who had lived too long in the shadow of danger. Prudence Hollister hadn't stumbled into town by chance. She had come with intent, a purpose. "You're running from something," Hollis said quietly. "Someone," she corrected, her voice low and edged. "And that someone has friends in high places." Morrison's laugh rumbled, but it was ugly, humorless. "You think marrying the town bookkeeper's going to protect you?" Vane couldn't protect a chicken from a fox. The insult burned, but Hollis forced the sting aside. "What exactly are you running from, Prudence?" Before she could answer, glass shattered. The front window exploded inward, scattering shards across the floor. A rock the size of a man's fist rolled to a stop near Hollis's shoes. Angry voices rose from outside. "There's the freak and her pet accountant." Someone jeered, "Run them out of town!" Another bellowed. Mayor Wickham rushed to the window, peering through the jagged hole. "There's at least 20 people out there, and they don't look happy." Morrison's grin was wolfish. "Seems the town's already decided what to do with your marriage." Prudence strode to the window, her massive frame moving with a surprising, almost predatory grace. She crossed her muscled arms as she surveyed the growing mob. 20 people, she murmured. "I've faced worse odds." The calm certainty in her voice made Hollis's blood run cold. Whatever Prudence had been before she came to this town, she wasn't just a woman looking for shelter. She was a survivor of battles most people wouldn't have lived to tell. And now, that battle-scarred will was the only thing standing between them and the mob, screaming for blood. Outside, the crowd swelled. Hollis spotted Mrs. Clemens at the front, her face contorted with righteous fury. Behind her stood the blacksmith, the barber, and a dozen other familiar faces. People Hollis had known for years, people who trusted him with their books, drank coffee with him after Sunday service, and nodded politely in the street. Now their eyes cut into him with disgust, like he was diseased. "Back door," Morrison suggested smoothly, though his tone dripped with venom. "Might want to slip away while you still can." Prudence didn't budge from the window. "I don't run anymore." The word struck Hollis like a hammer. "Any more?" he asked. She turned, meeting his eyes, as if weighing how much truth to give. "I spent 3 years running from men like Morrison. Different towns, different names. Always looking over my shoulder." Her scarred fists tightened, knuckles whitening. "But no more. It gets exhausting." Reed cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles nervously. "Perhaps, if you explained your circumstances to the proper authorities..." "The proper authorities," Prudence cut in, her voice sharp with bitterness, "are the ones I'm running from." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Federal Mayor Wickham actually stepped back from the window. Shaw's face drained to chalk, and even Morrison's swagger faltered. Hollis felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Federal marshals, 3 of them," Prudence said, her voice low, each word deliberate. "Paid to look the other way while stolen cattle crossed territorial lines." It was working for the railroad's investigative division, gathering evidence. Morrison's hand slid completely away from his gun. His eyes narrowed. "You're a railroad detective." "Was." Prudence turned from the window to face them all, her presence filling the room. "Until I gathered too much evidence on the wrong men." Outside, the crowd's noise swelled, the chant still indistinct but heavy with hate. Another rock slammed into the door with a dull, jarring thud. "So you came here," Hollis murmured, realization dawning. "And married me. For legal protection." Prudence nodded once. "A married woman has certain rights under territorial law, rights that are harder to strip away. Without cause." Wickham dabbed at his sweating forehead. "And you believe these marshals are following you?" Her smile was grim, almost humorless. "I don't believe. I know." She reached into her satchel and produced a folded newspaper, handing it to Hollis. The headline screamed across the page, "Federal Marshals Seek Dangerous Female Fugitive." Beneath it a crude sketch, wild hair, hard eyes, but undeniably prudence. "Dangerous fugitive," Reed whispered over Hollis's shoulder. "It says here you killed a man in Colorado." Prudence's face remained unreadable. "The article is right." The admission struck the room like a gunshot. Morrison backed toward the door. Reed fumbled with his glasses. Wickham swayed, pale and sweating, like he might collapse where he stood. But Hollis found himself staring at his wife, searching her scarred face for the killer she confessed to be, and all he saw was exhaustion. Outside, the chant finally sharpened. The voices of neighbors and friends twisted into something ugly, unified. "Burn them out! Burn them out!" "Self-defense," Prudence said quietly, as though answering the question in Hollis's mind. "Marshal Davies tried to silence me permanently when he realized I had documented his dealings with cattle thieves. He drew first." Shaw's voice cracked from the doorway. You shot a federal marshal?" "I shot a corrupt man who was about to murder me." Prudence's tone was flat, but her hands trembled faintly at her sides. The badge didn't cleanse his sins. It only made them worse. A sharp scent drifted through the broken glass. Smoke. Hollis rushed to the window. Outside, a man in the crowd lifted a torch, its flame snapping in the wind. The mob had swelled to 30 strong now, their chant deep and rhythmic, like a war drum. "They're actually going to burn us out," Hollis whispered, his voice breaking with disbelief. Morrison shoved past the others toward the door, his face hard. "This is your problem now, Vane. I want no part of harboring a fugitive." Harboring. Prudence stepped into his path, her broad shoulders filling the doorway. Her voice cut like a blade. "Interesting choice of words, from a man who's been harboring stolen cattle for 3 years." Morrison's face darkened, blood rushing hot to his cheeks. "You got no proof of that." Prudence's answer was measured. She reached into her satchel once more and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. She opened it deliberately, pages filled with her crisp handwriting. 47 documented transactions, dates, brands altered, buyer information. She turned a page and looked up, eyes like iron. "Including the Hendricks cattle you moved just last month." Morrison lunged. "Give me that!" Prudence pivoted with startling agility, sidestepping him easily. Morrison crashed into the desk, his shoulder thudding against the wood. The journal remained firm in her grip. "The journal stays with me," she said evenly, her calm more terrifying than any shout. "It's my insurance policy." From outside, a voice cut through the chant, louder, sharper than the rest. "Bring rope!" The words chilled Hollis to his marrow. His knees weakened, and he grabbed the desk for balance. Mayor Wickham pressed his pale face to the window. "Dear God," he whispered. "They're talking about hanging." Reed, his hands shaking, was already edging toward the rear door. "There has to be another way out of here," Hollis said, his voice tight. Prudence calmly slipped the journal back into her satchel, then rolled up her sleeves. Her arms, roped with muscle and scarred from old fights, flexed as though preparing for war. "There is," she said. "Through them." Hollis stared at her. "You want to fight 30 angry townsfolk?" "I want to survive the night." She tested the door's lock, her tone cold, resolute. "The question is, are you going to help me, or let them string us both up?" The torchlight outside flared brighter, licking across the window glass. Hollis's stomach twisted. In minutes, maybe seconds, he would learn exactly what kind of man he really was. He'd never been brave, a bookkeeper, a problem solver of numbers, not fists. But watching Prudence square her shoulders against the storm, something shifted inside him. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. For the first time since this nightmare began, Prudence's eyes flickered with surprise. "You're staying?" "It's my office. My town, my wife." The last word caught in his throat, strange and heavy, but he meant it. "What's the plan?" Morrison barked a bitter laugh. "Plan? Your plan should be to hand her over and beg for mercy." "Nobody's handing over anybody," Hollis snapped, his voice steadier than he felt. Prudence shoved against the heavy oak desk, dragging it toward the door. "Help me barricade this." Reed and Shaw hesitated, exchanged a glance, then joined in. Even Wickham stumbled forward to lend a shaky hand. Only Morrison stayed apart, arms crossed, lips curled in contempt. "This is insanity," he sneered. "You're making enemies of the whole town." Some enemies, Prudence replied, straining against the desk, are worth making. They heaved the desk into place just as footsteps thundered across the wooden walk outside. A fist pounded the door, rattling the hinges. "Open up, Vane," a voice roared. "Send out the woman, and we'll go easy on you." Prudence's hand dipped beneath her heavy skirts, producing a small revolver. She spun the chamber, the metallic clicks sharp as snapping bones. "They're lying," she said flatly. "Mobs don't go easy on anyone." Hollis wiped sweat from his brow. "How many bullets?" 6 in the gun. 12 more on my belt." She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "How's your aim?" "I've never shot at a person." Her expression didn't soften. "Hopefully you won't have to." She moved to the curtain and parted it just enough to peek outside. The mob's torches flickered like fireflies in a storm. Prudence's jaw tightened. But hope doesn't always work out. The pounding on the door grew savage. Fists and shoulders slamming in unison until the barricaded desk scraped an inch across the floor with every blow. Wickham wrung his hands, his face pale. "There has to be a way to negotiate this peacefully." "Tell that to them," Prudence said coldly, jerking her chin toward the window. Hollis joined her for a glance, and instantly regretted it. The crowd had swelled to 40, maybe more, armed with hammers, chains, and pitchforks. But what froze the blood in his veins wasn't the mob. It was the 3 mounted figures at the rear, federal marshals, badges glinting in the torchlight. "They found you," he whispered. Prudence's gaze locked on the riders. Her jaw hardened. "Davies's partners, Marshal Cooper, Marshal Kane, Marshal Torres. They've been tracking me 6 months. Maybe if you surrender," Reed began desperately. Prudence laughed, bitter and sharp. "Surrender to them. They're not here to arrest me. They're here to finish what Davies started." Morrison, who had been smouldering in the corner, perked up. "And what exactly did Davies start?" Prudence turned, eyes shadowed, voice like steel. "A war. And tonight it ends, one way or another." Outside, a booming voice cut across the mobs chanting, "Prudence Hollister, you're surrounded! Come out peacefully and no one else gets hurt!" The words carried the weight of authority, but Hollis felt their hollow ring. There would be no peace. Prudence's lips curved in a humorless smile. "Marshal Cooper always was impatient. That will be his downfall." She opened her satchel and spilled a stack of papers across Hollis's desk, official seals, signatures, and legal notations covering every sheet. Hollis blinked. "What is all this? Evidence? Testimony? Indictments?" Her scarred fingers tapped the documents one by one. "You asked if this town has a telegraph office?" "I already used it yesterday." Morrison stepped forward, alarm creeping into his voice. "What telegrams?" "To the territorial governor. To the federal prosecutor in Denver. To the railroad's head of security." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "Every record of the cattle theft operation. Every bribe. Every witness Davies silenced. And every crime committed by his 3 partners." Reed snatched up a paper, scanning it with practiced speed. His voice quavered. These are federal indictments. "Signed by Judge Harrison himself." Prudence nodded. "He's been building the case for 8 months. I was his inside source." The pounding on the door stopped. A strange silence pressed in. From the broken window, heated voices could be heard. Sharp, angry, disbelieving. "They're shouting," Wickham whispered, peeking through the curtain. "The marshals are arguing with each other. Cooper's reading something. Kane looks ready to draw, and Torres keeps looking toward the hills." Prudence glanced at her pocket watch. Calm, almost smug, right on schedule. "The governor's telegram has arrived." Hollis turned to her, stunned. "You planned this?" "All of it. Not the mob," she admitted. "But the marshals?" "Yes. I needed them to come after me in front of witnesses." She motioned to the restless crowd outside. "Now they can't make me disappear in the dark." Morrison's face drained of color. His voice cracked. "What about me?" "My business?" Prudence slid another sheet forward. Testimony from 12 ranchers, ledger entries from railroad records, and sale receipts in Morrison's name. She met his eyes without blinking. "You're finished, Morrison." The arguing outside rose to a furious pitch. From the mob, someone shouted, "What's happening? Why are we waiting?" Through the window, Hollis saw Marshal Cooper scribbling furiously on a scrap of paper, while Kane stalked back and forth, spitting curses. Torres wasn't even watching the crowd anymore. His eyes were on the horizon, as though expecting riders to come. "They're realizing they've walked into a trap," Prudence said, with quiet satisfaction. Reed set down the indictments with trembling fingers. "But what about the marriage? How did that even happen?" Prudence's expression softened, her hard edges easing for the first time that night. "I needed a witness who couldn't be bought, bribed, or bullied. Someone with a reputation for honesty. I spent 2 weeks researching you, Hollis. Understanding struck like a hammer blow. You drugged the preacher. A mild sedative in his coffee," she admitted. "Just enough to make him confused, but not enough to invalidate the vows. I needed the ceremony to be real, legally binding. And I chose you because you were the one honest man in this town? And because you deserved better than being Morrison's unwitting bookkeeper." Hollis's chest tightened. His ledgers, his careful records. He hadn't been keeping order. He'd been laundering stolen profits for years without realizing it. Before he could speak, the thunder of hooves rolled down Main Street. Hollis rushed to the window. A dozen riders charged through the darkness, led by a man whose silver badge flashed like a beacon. "Marshal Williams," Prudence breathed, relief breaking across her face. "The governor sent him." Williams rode straight into the mob, his voice cutting through the night like a rifle crack. "By order of the territorial governor, I place Marshals Cooper, Kane, and Torres under arrest for corruption, murder, and conspiracy." The crowd faltered, anger dissolving into murmurs. Mrs. Clemens lowered her torch. Men who had brandished pitchforks moments ago suddenly shuffled back into the shadows. Cooper snarled and yanked his revolver, but Williams was faster. His shot ripped through the night, slamming Cooper into the dirt with a cry. Blood darkened his sleeve. Kane and Torres froze, then raised their hands in surrender as Williams's deputies closed in. "What about the woman?" A voice shouted from the thinning mob. Williams dismounted, his boots striking the ground with authority. He strode to the office door, calling out, "Mrs. Hollister is a federal witness under government protection. Anyone who threatens her will answer to me personally." The effect was immediate. Torches guttered out, weapons dropped. Faces that had burned with rage now looked only ashamed. The mob dissolved like smoke, leaving only whispers and retreating footsteps. Morrison tried to slip away in the confusion, but Prudence's voice cut sharp through the night. "Jim Morrison," he froze. "Marshal Williams has a warrant for you too." Williams nodded. "Cattle theft, fraud, conspiracy. The evidence Miss Hollister gathered is thorough." 2 deputies seized Morrison. He struggled, cursing, but the chains snapped shut around his wrists. His glare burned at Hollis as they dragged him away. "This ain't over, Vane." "Yes, it is," Hollis replied, and meant it. The street finally cleared. Smoke still drifted from the broken torch, the silence after chaos ringing in Hollis's ears. Then came a knock, polite, steady. Hollis and Prudence moved the barricade aside. Williams tipped his hat as he entered. "Miss Hollister," he said respectfully, "the governor extends his gratitude for your service. Without you, this corruption would have rotted the whole territory." Prudence inclined her head, weary but unbroken. For the first time since she'd arrived, her shoulders seemed lighter, and Hollis, bookkeeper, accidental husband, and now unwilling hero, realized something startling. Their marriage might have been a scheme, but the bond forged tonight was real. The cattle theft ring had been dismantled, its leaders in chains. "It's Mrs. Hollister now," Prudence corrected softly, her voice steady, yet carrying the weight of everything they had survived. Williams arched a brow. "I heard about the marriage. Was that part of the investigation?" Before Prudence could answer, Hollis stepped closer, almost instinctively shielding her with his presence. "It started as part of the investigation," he admitted, his voice firm, "but it doesn't have to end there." Prudence turned, her sharp eyes searching his face, looking for hesitation, for doubt. "You want to stay married?" she asked quietly. "Even knowing what I am?" "I know exactly what you are," Hollis said, his voice stronger than he had ever known it could be. "You're someone who risked everything to do what's right. Someone stronger and braver than anyone in this town. And He paused, his chest tightening with nerves. Someone I'd be honored to build a real life with. For the first time since he'd met her, Prudence's smile was unguarded, genuine. "The railroad offered me a position," she said softly. "Head of their investigations division. It means traveling. Dangerous work." Hollis met her gaze without flinching. "Then I guess I'll just have to learn how to shoot properly." Williams chuckled at the exchange, shaking his head. "Well, this is unexpected, Mrs. Hollister. Your new position comes with a substantial salary and a house in Denver. And Mr. Vane," he added with a grin, "the territorial government has use for an accountant who understands both books and justice." 6 months later, Denver. Hollis stood in the parlor of their new home, case files spread across the desk. Prudence sat at the kitchen table, methodically cleaning her revolver. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the room. Hollis looked up from the files and found himself smiling. He had discovered something he never expected, that he had the courage and the aptitude for a life of justice. But more than that, he had discovered that some accidents turn out to be the best things that ever happened to you. Their marriage had shocked the town, but together they had forged a partnership that neither bullets, nor corruption, nor fear could ever break, and it was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now for another unforgettable tale where courage and justice collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like this. Your support means everything.